Hi everyone, I'm Paige Moss. At Facebook, I analyze data, fit statistical models, and build data pipelines to create maps that humanitarian organizations can use to support communities recovering from disaster. Though we think of them as rare events, disasters are, unfortunately, all too common. In 2018, natural disasters affected every part of the world and impacted 61.7 million people globally. Last November, Northern California suffered several of the worst wildfires in the state's history. Smoke filled the air across the San Francisco Bay Area, including at Facebook's headquarters in Menlo Park, for over a week. Schools were canceled, and people were told to stay indoors. At Facebook, my coworkers could be seen at the office wearing N95 smoke masks at their desks and in meetings. Meanwhile, I was home, 9 months pregnant, and couldn't leave the house due to the poor air quality. But while we all dealt with smoke in the air, just 200 miles north, the town of Paradise was dealing with something much worse: the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California state history. It was called the Camp Fire and started early in the morning on Thursday, November 8th. It spread quickly. While much of the population of Paradise and surrounding towns were able to evacuate and get to safety, at least 85 people lost their lives. Over 19,000 buildings were destroyed, and most of those were people's homes. When a disaster like this strikes, scores of emergency personnel respond. Firefighters battle to contain the blaze, protecting lives and property. Police, emergency medical technicians, and hospital staff direct people to safety and treat the injured. Humanitarian organizations mobilize to support the affected community, identifying and providing necessities such as shelter, food, or other supplies. The response and recovery efforts of humanitarian organizations are complicated logistical operations. They're often called upon to make decisions quickly, often with only partial information about what's happening on the ground. That information can come from many different sources, including official sources, news reports, as well as other humanitarian organizations operating in the region. But there's always a need to know more about what is happening and to know it sooner. And for that, some organizations are turning to non-traditional information sources, seeking to harness value in previously untapped potential. And you in the audience today can help. In this room, we've gathered together people working on some of the most innovative new products, services, and apps being developed today. As you all know, data is crucial to making your products work and improving them over time. But that very same data, the data that tells you how people are using what you built and whether they're getting value from it, that same data can also provide tremendous value for addressing human and social problems. Like other apps and services out there, Facebook relies on usage data to operate. Many people, myself included, use Facebook every day of their lives. And that means that we all use it during some of the hardest times, including when natural disasters strike. One example of this is Facebook Safety Check. Safety Check allows people in the vicinity of a crisis to easily let their friends and family know that they're safe. This has given peace of mind to many in the Facebook community. But today, I'm not going to focus on Safety Check. Rather, I'm going to talk about how we can use data about how people are using Facebook in areas impacted by natural disasters, and pull that data together in order to support humanitarians doing this life-saving work. There are several critical questions that humanitarian organizations need to address quickly, and which Facebook can help answer. The first is, what areas within a disaster region are affected? The second is, where are people evacuating from, and where are they going to? Third, where has power or connectivity been disrupted? Where are people unable to access information, charge their phones, or contact their support networks? And finally, where have displaced people settled? Where should organizations be thinking about providing ongoing long-term support to people? We've built several methods for generating insights from Facebook data in order to help humanitarian organizations answer these questions. Altogether, we call this Facebook Disaster Maps. Facebook Disaster Maps is our effort to help answer these questions by taking data about how people are using Facebook in areas impacted by natural disasters and producing aggregate pictures, the maps, of how the population is affected by and responding to the crisis. In 2018, we activated disaster maps for over 100 crises around the world. The insights we produced were shared with over 30 partner organizations, some of which are shown here. These partner organizations use these maps to inform their response efforts, and they also work closely with us to give feedback and let us know what's working well about the maps and how we might improve them to help them use them in their response more effectively. These maps are powered by location data. On Facebook, people's location is used to provide some services, including helping people find events nearby and showing them local ads and news stories. Location data also helps keep accounts secure by combining the location of typical logins with other signals to detect suspicious account activity. People on Facebook can control whether their device shares location information by opting into location services in their settings. This location data is what makes disaster maps possible and so useful to humanitarian organizations. But this data, as well as many other types of data used by smartphone apps, it can be personal. So if we're going to use this data to help with disaster response, we need to first ensure that individual privacy and community safety is protected. When creating disaster maps, we thought about privacy and security from the very beginning. And when we create the maps, we bake in a number of approaches to help protect privacy. These techniques include anonymization and aggregation. By that I mean all the values in the map come from grouping together many people so that they reflect population-level trends. Adding random noise. Though it may seem counterintuitive, by adding random noise across the map, we can make sure that the exact number of people in a sparsely populated area can't be determined, while still enabling organizations to see those population-level trends. Another technique that we use is called spatial smoothing. For this, what we do is we average data for a given location with data from other nearby locations. Not only does this further obscure values of small numbers of people, but it really helps those larger trends stand out more clearly in the data for people who are using the maps. And finally, we remove small counts. The value that humanitarian organizations gain from these maps is based on insights about larger population-level insights. And so the data sets aren't useful for identifying the needs and behaviors of small groups, and to protect privacy of those groups, we remove that data from the map. These methods altogether help preserve those population-level insights that are useful to humanitarian organizations while still protecting privacy and security. We currently produce 5 types of disaster maps, and these are focused on informing different questions. The first map type is our Facebook population map. This map highlights areas of the crisis-impacted region where we see more or fewer people than usual. And the way we determine that is by comparing to a pre-disaster baseline from months before the disaster began. That comparison can help draw attention to areas that are affected by the crisis or where evacuations have occurred. The second map type is our movement map. In this map, we identify pairs of locations that people are moving between in larger or smaller numbers than usual. That can help provide signal on large-scale population movement. The third map type is our displacement map. While all of the other map types that I'll show you today focus on the first few days of a crisis, this map attempts to look at whether or not a population has been displaced from their homes over the long term, so for weeks or for months. And that information can be very important for humanitarian organizations who want to support the displaced population so that they know where to provide resources and support people over that long-term time horizon. Our fourth type of disaster map is the network coverage map. This map highlights areas where cell network coverage appears to be diminished during a disaster compared to pre-disaster levels. Our fifth and final type of disaster map is our power availability map. This map shows where the Facebook community is able to charge their mobile devices more or less often than usual. In aggregate, this charging behavior can serve as a proxy for the state of the power grid. Together, these 5 represent the current state of Facebook disaster maps. Now, I'll walk through 3 of these in detail to show how we actually look at these maps in order to generate insight. This is the population map for the area around Paradise, California, the day before the campfire started. It's just a normal day, and so the map is mostly yellow, showing that we don't see areas with substantial differences in the number of people in a place compared with what we might expect from those previous few months. However, as we look at this very same map over the course of different time snapshots throughout the fire as it progresses, we begin to see patterns that diverge from usual. Blue highlights areas with large decreases in the Facebook population compared to usual, and this blue area is centered on the town of Paradise. The quick decrease can be explained by people leaving the area, fleeing the fire. On the other hand, the bright red areas that you see here surrounding Paradise, including the city of Chico, indicate where we're seeing many more people than we normally would see. This can be explained by people being displaced from Paradise to Chico, but also by emergency responders and personnel moving into the area to help with survivors of the fire. It highlights regions that may be the most severely affected and points humanitarians to where their services may be most needed. This is a movement map from that very same region. The movement map really serves as a natural complement to the population map. When we see that everyone has left Paradise, the next natural question we might have is, where did people go? Where should resources be sent or shelters set up in order to help those evacuees? In this map, we visualize the number of people moving from one city source to another. So in the previous map, I mentioned people may be moving out from Paradise to Chico. In this map, we try to cut the data another way to say, okay, is that hypothesis supported? And what we see looking at the outbound movement out of Paradise is that indeed there's a substantially larger movement of people from Paradise to Chico than we would normally see under usual circumstances. Now, and we also can see that people are moving to a number of other nearby towns as well. So once we see this high-level trend, we might want to learn more about the numbers that really underlie what we're seeing. And so we could click and learn that in this case, there's a 500% increase in the number of people traveling from Paradise to Chico during this time compared to usual. Another hypothesis we might have looking at this map is, what about this town of Magalia that's just north of Paradise? Did people evacuate from there? And if so, where did they go? So to learn that, we could click on Magalia, and again, we see many more people than usual went from Magalia to Chico, and some went down to Orville as well. And again, we could learn that this represents a 260% increase compared to usual. So it really is an unusual trend that we're seeing here, and so we should pay attention to that. Now, I've talked a lot about learning about outbound movements, so people leaving Paradise or leaving Magalia, but we could also look at inbound movement, say to Chico, and see where are people coming from that are entering Chico during this time. Again, we see the influx of people from Magalia and Paradise, but we also observe that there is an increase in the number of people coming to Chico from the south compared to usual. Humanitarians benefit from seeing these patterns over the course of the disaster because movement during a disaster is dynamic and can be influenced by events like road blockages as the disaster unfolds. And so this can be a really valuable snapshot that helps them with their response. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk through a network coverage example. In June of 2018, there was a catastrophic volcanic eruption in Guatemala. This is a map of the connectivity coverage before the eruption, with the cooler green areas indicating places served by more active cell towers. And the orange areas are places that have connectivity coverage, but just slightly less than those green areas. This map shows the state of connectivity after this volcanic eruption. The white and dark red areas highlight places with little to no cell network coverage. And when we compare these two maps, before and after the volcanic eruption, two takeaways are striking. First, we can identify those places where connectivity has been brought down by the disaster. This is important. People in these areas are cut off. They can't access information about what to do after this terrible event, and they also can't contact their friends and family to let them know that they're safe or to receive support. There are humanitarian organizations dedicated to restoring connectivity after a disaster, and these types of maps help them know where that need is. Second, we also see that despite the devastation of this volcanic eruption, there are places in the region where network coverage remains strong. The green area that you see in the after picture. This is valuable information for planning a response effort on the ground. Humanitarian organizations moving into the region to help need to know where they can expect to have connectivity, because much of what they do relies on good communication with one another, with their staff, as well as with survivors, in order to manage that response effectively. So knowing where they have connectivity, or can expect to have it, can help them know where to set up operations. So far, I've given you an idea of how these maps are created and the types of insights that they can generate. But it's really the humanitarians using the maps who turn this information into action. That's why I'm so excited to share the stage today with Andrew Schroeder from Direct Relief. Direct Relief is a leading humanitarian nonprofit in the United States, and they distribute life-saving medicines and medical supplies to local healthcare providers and communities in need. They provide this response in 90 countries and in all 50 states. Andrew leads Direct Relief's application of geographic information services and data analysis, and he uses those tools to identify humanitarian medical needs and to evaluate program impact. And he'll talk here for a couple of minutes about how his organization has used these maps. Here's Andrew.
Thanks, Paige. So as Paige was saying, I make maps every day to help guide essential medical resources to where they need to go. And I do that for Direct Relief, which is an organization that provides essential medical services to people in need. Direct Relief is a global nonprofit organization, but back in 2017, at the end of 2017, we faced a crisis right in our backyard. Direct Relief is based in Santa Barbara, California, and the Thomas Fire, which was at the time the largest wildfire in the history of the state of California, was blazing through Ventura and Santa Barbara, California, so right in our backyard. This fire impacted the entire community. So it caused over $2.2 billion worth of damages. It burned over 280,000 acres of land. Over 1,000 structures were burned to the ground. And a crisis went on for weeks on end. From a public health point of view, what we're trying to respond to in this case is the threat of wildfire smoke. So the smoke was pouring off the hills for weeks, and wildfire smoke is really, really bad for you. It contains a range of harmful chemicals. It's composed of microparticulate matter that can settle deep into your lungs. It exacerbates chronic conditions like asthma, and it causes even worse problems for people that are especially vulnerable, like elderly people and children. So what we were trying to do was make sure the community was protected by distributing N95 particulate masks to as many people as we could get these out to. Well, we had a problem, right? we need to figure out where these are going. Where are the best places throughout Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, which are both pretty big, where we can maximize the reach of this kind of service and make sure that the community is protected. Fire is also a very dynamic situation. Fires move around a lot. The smoke changes with the wind. So we make a lot of assumptions historically about where that trend is going and where we need to respond to people in need. So it was right at this time in December 2017 that I was introduced to Facebook Disaster Maps. And as Paige was saying, Facebook Disaster Maps is using aggregated and anonymized user location information to determine where people are moving to and from during an emergency. So this is Santa Barbara and Ventura, California, where you can see the outline of the Thomas Fire. And for days on end during the crisis, I was monitoring the movement of population across both counties to make sure that we could respond effectively and locate resources. This, I think, was one of the first times that we could actually start to answer this question on the basis of data rather than assumptions. We could see where population was higher than expected, where it was lower than expected. We could see where anomalous trends were emerging, and we could figure out areas that were likely to be seeing population that's congregating in need of the services that we could provide. So many of these locations where we were seeing anomalously high trends in areas where smoke distribution might have been going became points of distribution for N95 masks. We could adapt our response in near real time to meet changing demands and circumstances. And it's worth kind of dwelling on that idea for just 1 minute. This is something that sounds very simple, but from the standpoint of humanitarian organizations is very new. We literally could not see this before we looked at Facebook Disaster Maps. This was something that made a pattern that had been there all along, people moving in response to crisis, and rendered it visible so that we could respond to it. So in combination with a range of other data sources, this was for the first time that we could check our assumptions about what should happen and respond to what was actually happening in terms of the movement of population. And in the end, we were able to hand out over 400,000 masks to dozens of communities throughout the region. Then we made sure that people were more protected than they would otherwise have been from the serious health risks of wildfire smoke. Now, in the year and a half since the Thomas Fire, Direct Relief has used data from Facebook Disaster Maps to help us respond to dozens of crises throughout the world. Most recently, during the response to the devastating cyclone which struck the countries of Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Malawi in southern Africa, we used population movement maps pre-disaster to understand the movement of population away from coastal areas, and we used network connectivity maps to help us understand where health centers and hospitals were most likely to be cut off from information and communication services. Working in conjunction with colleagues at NetHope and at the United Nations Emergency Telecommunications Cluster, we could help to identify health centers that were in greatest need of connectivity or that may have been outside of connectivity altogether. And afterwards, as they became reconnected, we could learn what their medical needs were, and we could begin to respond to those needs with essential medical supplies. So when we learn about need, we can act. And the Facebook Data for Good team has been a remarkable set of partners in this activity. They have really been not just providers of data, they've been direct collaborators with us to make sure that we have the information that we need to respond to the kinds of crises that are affecting people throughout the world in some of the most vulnerable places. We can't wait to see what you in the developer community are able to do with this data and in conjunction both with Direct Relief and other partners to make sure that this data continues to get more effective, more impactful, and to serve more people around the world. So thank you very much for your efforts.
One of the coolest things about disaster maps has been how it grew from a small seed of an idea into this whole trove of useful tools, the maps, that are actively being used today. And as Andrew mentioned, that really came about due to strong collaboration between us at Facebook and our humanitarian partners. It really all started with getting together in a room and asking the question, what are your most pressing data gaps and how can we help? The answer to that question meant building something fundamentally new together, the maps you see today. And as Andrew said, it really hadn't been done before. And so at the outset, we didn't necessarily know what it could become. And you all here today have that opportunity as well. You know your application better than anyone. And so you are uniquely positioned to recognize the untapped potential in your work. I encourage you to think creatively about new ways that what you're developing can serve society. One way to start is by asking yourself the same question that we asked ourselves, which is, where are the gaps and how can I help? Today, I've focused on sharing our disaster maps effort in the Data for Good space. But if disaster mapping isn't your thing, there are so many other avenues for using data for good. To name just a few of the other things that we're doing at Facebook, we just released high-resolution population density maps for all of Africa. And these are turning out to be amazing tools for improving vaccination campaigns. We also have partnerships based on Facebook posts called Insights for Impact, which help organizations improve their outreach for conditions like Zika and meningitis. Finally, we run perhaps the largest survey of small businesses in the world, called the Future of Business. And this survey helps researchers understand what small businesses need and how to support them better. You can learn more about disaster maps, as well as these other Data for Good initiatives, on the Facebook Data for Good website. In the meantime, I hope you leave this session inspired to think about your own data and how it can be used for good in the world. Thank you.